Oh, yeah, why can't we? So Keir Starmer's the United Kingdom Prime Minister gave a speech about right-wing thuggery. It's awful over there. The social cohesion, it's fractured. And obviously in this country, here in Australia, Prime Minister Albanese has decided that we actually need special envoys to keep us together in tough times. It's tough because socially it's tough. We have the war in the Middle East that's sort of ripping us apart, and it ignites flames on both sides. We have Ukraine and we have economic pressures that are also placing such downward pressure on people and their ability to stay calm. So may I introduce to you our newly appointed Special Envoy for Social Cohesion. His name is Peter Khalil. Yeah,
Hi, Libby.
that's how I say it, right?
Not
Come in a
bad.
bit closer.
Khalil. Yeah,
Khalil, it's got a K, but it's
got a
with
K,
an
yeah,
H.
yeah.
George told me how to say it properly.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm very well, thank
Thanks
you.
for
And I
having
need
me.
to just explain the context of you, Peter, where you grew up,
Yeah.
because you represent the electorate, kind of where you grew up. It's the
Yeah.
electorate in Victoria of Wills, which is former Prime Minister Bob Hawke's
That's right,
electorate, and Phil Cleary, the great football great,
Yeah.
who has been a huge campaigner against violence against women.
Yeah.
His sister sadly lost her life in an abusive domestic relationship. And you've inherited this amazing seat, which I guess is sort of, in Sydney, it's kind of like a Marrick Philly, inner Westy, Dulwich Hilly kind of thing.
Bit of both, but also it's a very multicultural seat,
Yeah.
very diverse. So yeah, a little bit like that in Sydney in the southern part in Brunswick, but further north, very working class.
Very working class. And like Ingham, New Farm in Brisbane. I'm just trying to put it in a context.
Bit of Logan.
Bit of Logan?
Bit of Logan.
Bit of Logan. So let's just go to the cycle that we're in. This is Prime Minister Albanese speaking just yesterday.
I want to reassure Australians, probable does not mean inevitable, and it does not mean there is intelligence about an imminent threat or danger. But the advice that we've received is that more Australians are embracing a more diverse range of extreme ideologies, and it is our responsibility to be vigilant.
This is Prime Minister Albanese talking about a probable risk of terrorism as distinct from a possible. When you heard that yesterday, given you're the bloke who's the special envoy for social cohesion, did you know that was coming?
There'd been a fair bit of discussion within government about the fraying of social cohesion, obviously, and the appointment, especially envoy sounds very grandiose. But basically what it means is someone to work on these policy areas to try and facilitate and also find ways that we can make people, work within society, the constituent parts of society, making that unified whole. People got to disagree. Everyone can disagree, but let's disagree a bit more peacefully, a bit more respectfully, I think is the key. That sounds a bit amorphous, but there are policies that you can put in place to actually incentivise that. There are legal legislative frameworks, but there's also cultural norms. And I think that's really important as well, the kind of frameworks within a society that allow people to engage or allow groups to engage in ways that doesn't lead to conflict or breakdown or fragmentation of the society itself.
So, like former Supreme Court Judge in Victoria, Lex Lasry, now he's a huge campaigner. For those of you around Australia, Lex has been really active in terms of campaigning against the death penalty. When someone got arrested overseas, Lex was on a plane trying to help them. He today was talking in the newspaper about why youth are turning to crime. He was saying it's got nothing to do with bail laws. He was talking about parenting, which is a different generation of parents.
Yep.
And given that 40% of Australians have a parent that's born overseas, we're talking about parenting styles or parenting influences that have come perhaps from war-torn areas.
Yep.
And young people turning to divisive actions to express their anger or disempowerment.
Yep.
How do you help that? How do you undo people's programming?
And this is a really big question because what you're talking about are the fundamentals of how a society operates and how it's cohesive, right? So social media and the way that those algorithms work is a big challenge because it actually exacerbates fragmentation. In some respects, the algorithms work to pull people apart and sow discord or division
To
or
create
disharmony
drama.
and create drama because the way they're set up is to actually draw people towards their inherent biases, but also anger and fear.
It sells.
And it sells better, yeah, in that sense. And I think there's a huge challenge that we have with that because this generation of kids, it's going back before COVID as well, on the phones with social media. But even us as adults, I mean, I find myself sort of stuck to this phone all the time and try and pull myself away. it changes the way your brain works as well, doesn't it? So there's a big challenge in that. How much of that is a legislative framework to try and address those issues with the big tech companies and their responsibility? How much of it is freedom of expression? It's always that balance, right? How do you get that balance right?
But how do you do that? Like, you're one person with this job. I mean, you've had an experience of growing up an outsider, growing up can I put it in inverted commas, like an ethnic or a wog? George and I were talking about the appropriate term.
Yeah, well, I copped that a fair bit.
Did you? Well, I was going to say, what was that experience like for you in the 70s, the late 70s?
I think growing up in a housing commission in the inner city, Egyptian background with, migrant parents from Egypt, it was difficult. There was a lot of racism, there was a lot of prejudice, but also there was also kindness, and there was also an acceptance, and there was also that kind of, I know people, sounds like a cliche, but the fair go was there as well.
Within that community.
Within that context, it was like we struggled a lot. We had a lot of obstacles that we had to overcome. But my dad and mum used to say to me, well, first, get a very good education, because that's critically important.
It's the key.
Education is key. Second, they kind of said to me, well, everyone says Australia's a lucky country. Actually, no, it's not. We're the lucky ones to be here, because they left.
Where did they come?
From Egypt.
But why?
Persecution, war, fleeing for a better life in Australia, one of security and opportunity as well. And they used to say, we're the lucky ones to be Australian. So even with all these difficulties, give something back to the country that's given us such an opportunity. Right. Now, that didn't sink in my head when I was younger. It eventually kind of percolated, as parents always, the stuff that they put in your head percolates over time. And I came to see the wisdom in that, because despite the difficulties, there is something about our society, and we talk about a multicultural society here. It's been relatively harmonious. There's been challenges over the decades. Let's not sugarcoat that. But when you compare it to other parts of the world, look at the polarization in the US now. Look at Europe. Look at the UK. We have a relatively harmonious society. I think the Prime Minister is cognizant of that. He wants to protect what we have, but also find ways to enhance it, improve it. And you say it's a big job. Yes, it covers across government. I don't have decision-making power. I don't even have money, but I can put forward ideas. I can put forward policies or policy development ideas that we can actually implement, or if the PM decides to implement, or the Home Affairs Minister, to actually help that cohesion.
So you're a bridge, like feeding ideas back through. Like, I can imagine you'd be talking to people, because that's what an envoy kind of flies around.
Is that what they do? Thanks for letting me know. I didn't realise.
I mean, that's the thing. Like,
you've got to engage, absolutely, and it's listening. I think that's the other part of the job: listening to people, to communities, to stakeholders, understanding their concerns, and where we can actually do better.
Peter Hallel is with you on the radio. He is Australia's Special Envoy for Social Cohesion in a time of great unrest. I'm interested in what you said about your parents saying they've fled a war-torn country and you've got to give something back. That's a really interesting message, because I think a lot of people have fled war-torn countries in our country. How does one impart that message to create social cohesion when you have been programmed to fight or protest, when you're feeling humiliated, disenfranchised, poor, unable to cope? Because, these things are programmed in. Sometimes abused people abuse. We know that story.
Well, this is a really interesting question, because, first of all, protest is a fundamentally important democratic right. So 100% we support protest. We have to allow that part of our democratic system to flourish, because people have to express themselves peacefully. The difference is when it crosses over into violence, when it crosses over into hate speech, when it crosses over into physical harassment of individuals, or hate speech or vilification of people based on their ethnicity, their faith background, their gender, their sexuality, whatever it might be. That's unacceptable. That's when you start to see that conflict and that fragmentation occur. But peaceful protest, and the vast majority of protests in Australia has been peaceful, Libby. There have been some incidents that have crossed over into violence, and that needs to be called out. But to your point about how do people express themselves?
Yeah, especially when they come from somewhere else.
You'd find a lot of the communities that I've spoken, and I've got a background in multicultural policy, and I worked at SBS for a long time, and I was Victoria Multicultural Commissioner. This is not just about multicultural Australia, though. This is broader than that. It's about socioeconomic difference. It's about intergenerational fairness or unfairness, frankly. It's about different political perspectives. It's about populism that's occurring, and the way people are dividing, and how we can bring and unite Australians. So to answer your question, a lot of people I speak to who come from these migrant backgrounds, new and emerging migrant groups, they basically realise how fortunate they are to have this opportunity in Australia. And you can do both things. You can protest and understand the opportunity, the social, economic and other opportunities you have in this country.
So what do we do about the the economic pressure. I've got some interesting figures here from The Guardian.
Mm.
48% of participants in this particular declining trust in the government believe economic issues are the most important problems facing Australia today, followed by housing affordability and shortages. That's the mapping social cohesion study.
Yeah.
So
Good
well,
study.
so we've got this economic pressure where in particular young men are feeling disenfranchised and humiliated
Yep.
by the lack of opportunity for them to do what they think they should be doing, which is provide,
Yep.
which attracts them to areas that
Well, yes. And this is a really thing. They get manipulated, that anger and that position gets manipulated by a lot of bad actors, I would call them, the misogynist kind of influences that you see on social media manipulate those views. But what is populism? Populism is, if you look at the populism you see in the US, it's basically appealing to the worst aspects of people's nature, that fear, the anger, the hatred to, or exacerbating
Blaming
the
someone
anger to
else.
other. Yeah, scapegoating, demagoguery, basically not having real solutions, but saying slogans that sound good. And so how do you address that? That's a really big question.
yeah.
I don't have the answer to it straight away.
Oh, well,
But we're working on those
you're working?
issues because you have to find a way to give people confidence in the democratic institutions that serve them.
Yeah.
And that's that's our challenge.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
To give them confidence in the democratic institutions and to believe in the society that we have.
But also you, media, the corporate world, sporting clubs, all these institutions in our society are made up of people, and their behaviour and the way they carry themselves actually is what people see and feel. So that kind of setting of standards, when I talked about not the legal side of things, but the cultural norms, that's very important.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Libby.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Do you think you might need it?
Yeah, I do.
Good to meet you.
Thank you.
Peter Halil, thanks for making yourself accessible. You know, governments and things can seem so inaccessible to people who are hurting. So it's really lovely that you make yourself accessible and meet people because when you feel like you're cut off from power, I think that's when people flail around and hurt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks for meeting
Thank you.
us
Cheers.
all at Disrupt.